The second barrel. Our approach to it has the potential to throw the remainder of our run completely off, and the process of setting ourselves up for it to be correct and fast has caused many barrel racers to pull their hair out. But today, that's going to change. The truth is, problems at the second barrel tend to actually be pretty similar, but in most cases, it's not just that one problem is occurring at the barrel. There are several things contributing. Although making adjustments to specifically how you ride in a run may be part of the solution, it's not going to be the complete solution itself. What this means is if your horse already has some bad habits established here, then mastering the second barrel, quite honestly, is not going to happen overnight. Now, it can still be a relatively quick fix when you consider that the problem of over-anticipating is something that often haunts barrel racers and their horses throughout their entire careers. So the time you take here to really establish quality movement at the deepest level will ultimately have a positive, lasting effect that will be more than worth it in the long run. Let's begin the 3x3 process by considering number one, not the problem, but what needs to happen, or the solution. Let's consider the source of the problem versus the symptom. Someone may describe the symptom as cutting into the turn or dropping the shoulder. But what's actually happening is number one, the horse isn't getting positioned well enough in his body. And number two is that the shaping of the body isn't happening at the correct time and place on the pattern. The horse is essentially making assumptions about where the rate point is. On top of that, if you're not able to be effective when making a correction in the middle of a run if necessary, that's another completely separate problem. So before we can create a solution by combining all these elements, we need to think about and address them separately first. As you can see, it's not just a matter of picking up the shoulder. Next, let's consider where we need to take action to resolve this issue. Ask yourself, where exactly on the pattern is the problem occurring, and where on the pattern will the solution take place or begin to take place? Be specific. How many feet from the barrel? What distance before the barrel? Examine your tracks and even mark it out. You may need to start instilling a habit of getting shaped in slow work well in advance of the turn, and then be much more specific about where the rate point is. Even consider putting soccer markers on the ground where these spots need to be so that they become even more clear in your mind, which will essentially help make it clear in your horse's mind. The next consideration is when. We need to be more particular about what we ask for and receive from our horses in our slow work in general and in a run. So when correcting issues at the second barrel, you might make a point to be more mentally aware of the suppleness of your horse's ribs in general. You might use some suggestions from my book to establish this and even apply the counter-arcing exercises. Now, in almost all cases, the horse needs to shape their body sooner and more correctly and appropriately after leaving the first barrel, yet not making assumptions to be truly prepared for the second. Now, in all reality, at speed, our horses' bodies are going to be relatively straight through a turn. However, many horses come into the second with an extreme inside-out shape, meaning their rib cage is flexed toward the barrel and their nose and hips are out away from it, which you could refer to as a bad banana in a lateral sense. So we have to exaggerate the correct bend to achieve a balance in a run. Another part of the problem is that we must condition our horse's mind to connect more with us as riders and not make inappropriate assumptions about where to start the turn. We need to make it very clear that although preparation for the turn starts before it, the turn itself starts at the barrel and not before it. If our horse does end up making a poor choice, we also need to have the foundational elements of responsiveness instilled, even at speed, so that we can offer our horse guidance or correction without resistance. Now, let's talk about the rider responsibilities. When our horse tends to anticipate the second barrel, it can be hard to keep riding straight. This is because we naturally want to sync with our horses. When they drop, we tend to drop too, to a degree. Otherwise, we'll essentially be going two different directions, and that's not necessarily going to end up well in a run. If your horse is somewhat on the fence about his commitment to the turn, then it can be a big help to focus straight and forward to really ride your horse deep into the hole. You want to be conscious that you're not tightening your body or bracing for that turn. Stay as fluid here as possible. In a run, you also might be more conscious of the bend in your midsection, in your inside elbow, and the angle and the position of your own shoulders, because this directly relates to our horses. In fact, this same level of consciousness needs to pour over into our slow work and our general riding. If we really pay close attention, the habits our horses have on the pattern do exist elsewhere, but it just takes a very advanced horseman to notice when they aren't nearly as glaringly obvious as they become with speed. Even when you take all these steps, it's possible that your horse might still need some extra support with shape. It may legitimately be hard for him. Now this is where specific bits come in that can offer some support. Ones with broken mouthpieces and a lot of moving parts tend to help create more suppleness and flexibility in our horses. But remember, they're most effective for enhancing what has already been established versus creating responsiveness that isn't there to begin with. You may also need to close your hand on the rein just a split second before the turn to help your horse prepare and shape his body. And although I don't tend to use leg cues in a run myself, it's certainly something you can experiment with. The important thing is to realize that if we have to contort our bodies and take all kinds of special considerations for exactly how we need to ride our horses, if it consumes our mind in a run, then chances are good that somewhere down the line we fail to effectively educate our horses on their responsibilities, which is to rate and shape correctly at the correct time and place on the pattern without having to be held or micromanaged through every step. If you really want to fix a problem on the second barrel for good, even consider putting competing on the back burner for just a few weeks or as long as necessary to address this. Then test your work with a practice run. If your horse still makes assumptions about diving into the second barrel, you may need to interrupt the pattern right there as it's happening to follow through with reinforcing the new habits you've been instilling. But absolutely make sure you're doing all the foundational work first to support the correction, and you shouldn't have to do it repetitively and risk creating any negative associations with that spot on the pattern. The last thing you want to do in a potential hot spot like this in the approach to the second barrel is create even more stress, insecurity, or anxiety about the turn. So there you have it, an in-depth, intense, solution-creating process for correcting second barrel issues that is just as effective for any other imaginable issue. For even more support, feel free to download the troubleshooting worksheet below and be sure to get a copy of my book, The First 51, to receive many more detailed insights and exercises to develop confident, educated, winning barrel horses.